You notice it in a small moment. Someone asks how you are, maybe at work or standing in line somewhere, and before you even check in with yourself, the answer is already out. I am fine, or it is nothing, or it is okay, really. The words leave easily, almost politely, as if they are doing you a favor by keeping the interaction smooth. Sometimes it happens when someone offers help. You feel the impulse rise, just briefly, then disappear. You hear yourself say you've got it. You say it lightly. You might even smile, as if to reassure them that nothing complicated is happening here, that there is no need to slow down. There is no drama in it, no sadness you can point to, just a quiet adjustment, like shifting your weight so no one notices you're tired, like lowering the volume on yourself without realizing your hand is on the dial. What is strange is how automatic it feels. There's no decision, no pause to consider whether you actually need something. The response seems to exist before the question does, like a reflex that learned the shape of the world before you learned your own. Most people live inside this reaction for years without ever being told it is happening. At first, it looks like maturity. You learn early that life keeps moving, that everyone has their own problems, that being low maintenance is often rewarded. In adult life in the US, efficiency is a kind of virtue. You do your job, pay your bills, keep things light, do not complicate the room, do not slow the pace, do not ask for more time than you were given. Downplaying your own needs can look like strength. It can sound like independence. You might even tell yourself you prefer it this way, that you simply aren't someone who needs much, that wanting less keeps you flexible and adaptable. But when you sit with it long enough, there's a subtle tension underneath, a sense that you are constantly rounding yourself down, shaving off the edges before anyone else has to decide what to do with them, before anyone else even sees them. Psychology reveals that patterns like this rarely start as choices. They start as adaptations, small ones, quiet ones, the kind that make sense in the moment and then slowly harden into habits you stop questioning because they feel familiar, because they feel like who you are. You might remember being younger and realizing that expressing too much made things awkward, that asking for support changed the mood, that needing something came with explanations, delays, or disappointment. Nothing extreme, just enough to teach you something about how much space you were allowed to take before it felt uncomfortable. So you learned to preempt it. You learned to need less, at least on the surface. You learned how to manage expectations by lowering them first, how to keep yourself from being the source of tension in a room. What's interesting is how this carries into decision-making later on. You choose restaurants you don't care about. You agree to plans you're already tired thinking about. You let deadlines slide for things that matter to you, while showing up on time for everything else. You postpone rest, conversations, even medical appointments, telling yourself it's not that bad, that it can wait, that there are more important things to handle first, that you'll circle back when things calm down. You notice how easily you accommodate others and how rarely you question it. You don't frame it as self-sacrifice. It feels more like neutrality, like you were simply not that demanding of a person, like this is just how you're wired. There is a moment, though, when this belief wobbles. It might be late at night or during a quiet drive home, when you realize you are more tired than you admit. Not exhausted, just worn thin in a way that doesn't have a clear cause. And for a second, you wonder where all that energy went, and when you agreed to give it away so consistently without ever signing anything. Researchers suggest that human behavior often organizes itself around avoiding subtle discomfort rather than seeking fulfillment. This is not about fear in a dramatic sense. It's about avoiding friction, avoiding the moment where your needs take up space and someone else has to respond to them. That moment can feel heavier than we expect, heavier than the cost of staying quiet, heavier than the quiet resentment that builds without a clear target. There is also something socially rewarded about being the person who is easy, the one who doesn't complain, the one who adapts. Over time, that identity can feel safer than testing whether there's room for more, whether anyone would stay present if you asked. I catch myself doing this too, minimizing things even in my own head,
telling myself it's fine when I know it's not quite true. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being honest or just efficient with my emotions, choosing speed over accuracy. The line between those two can get blurry, especially when you've been praised for crossing it without making a mess. What complicates it is that downplaying your needs doesn't always feel like denying yourself. It can feel like staying in control, like choosing not to burden anyone, like being considerate, responsible, emotionally regulated. But there's a quiet contradiction hiding there. Control and avoidance often wear the same clothes, and it's hard to tell which one you're practicing when everything feels calm.
When you watch this pattern closely, it shows up in places you would not expect. In friendships where you always say you are flexible, in relationships where you wait for the other person to notice something is wrong, in work settings where you absorb pressure without naming it, assuming that is just part of being capable. You might tell yourself you will speak up later, when it matters more, when you have a clearer reason. Later has a way of staying in the future, always just out of reach, always requiring one more justification. Cognitive patterns like this tend to reinforce themselves. The less you express your needs, the less visible they become, not just to others, but to you. You stop checking in. You stop asking what you want because you are already used to adjusting to what is available. There's a moment I keep thinking about, sitting across from someone who asks a genuine question. Are you okay with this? And instead of answering, you feel a small internal calculation. Will this change anything? Will it complicate things? Is it worth the effort to explain something I have already learned to carry quietly? Often, the answer you give has less to do with how you feel and more to do with what you expect will happen next, how much emotional labor you believe the moment will require, how much space it might take up. That expectation matters more than we like to admit. Psychology suggests that emotional triggers are not always intense feelings. Sometimes they're predictions, quiet assumptions about how the world responds to you. If you assume your needs will be inconvenient, you learn to edit them out early before anyone else has the chance to react. Over time, this editing becomes invisible. You do not feel silenced. You feel normal. You feel like someone who handles things well, someone others can rely on, someone who doesn't make waves. There's also grief in this pattern, though it rarely announces itself as such. It shows up as a vague sense of being unseen, even by people who care about you. You might think, they should know me better, without realizing how little you show them to know. I hesitate here because it is tempting to turn this into a diagnosis or a solution, but that misses the texture of it. This is not a flaw to fix. It is a way of moving through the world that once served a purpose and still does in certain moments. Still, there are times when it costs more than it protects. Sometimes I question whether this pattern is actually kindness or just a well-practiced disappearance. That thought makes me uncomfortable, and I'm not always sure it's fair or accurate, but it lingers longer than I expect. Once you notice it though, you start seeing the small tells, the way you soften statements before they leave your mouth, the way you add qualifiers so nothing sounds too firm, the way you rush to reassure others that you're okay, even when they didn't ask. In everyday American life, this often passes as being chill, being low drama, being an adult who doesn't make things harder than they need to be. But there is a difference between being calm and being absent from your own experience, and that difference can be subtle enough to miss for years while everything looks fine on the surface. Human behavior has a way of protecting us from immediate discomfort while quietly reshaping our inner world. Downplaying your needs keeps things smooth on the surface. It also teaches you to look away from parts of yourself that ask for more presence, more acknowledgement. Not more attention, just more honesty. The realization doesn't land all at once. It arrives in fragments, a conversation that leaves you emptier than expected, a decision you agree to and then regret without knowing why, a tiredness that sleep doesn't fix because it's not physical.
You do not need to label it. You do not need to change anything right now. It is enough to notice the moment it happens again. The next time someone asks how you are, or offers help, or gives you space to speak, notice the familiar reflex, the quick minimization, the polite smoothing over. And notice, just briefly, what you felt before the words came out.